Hello, Tony here, back on my channel once more with another deck profile. So, Ancient Guardians is finally released, and with it comes 3 new archetypes added to the available card pool. Of those 3 archetypes, the one that we'll be exploring this week will be the one that sees the most potential for meta playability right out the gate, that being the snakes of the Ogdoadic. So to provide some historical context, the Ogdoadic are a series of reptile-type monsters based off of the Ogdoad, a group of 8 primordial deities worshipped in ancient Egypt in the city of Hermopolis. Drawing from their ancient Egyptian origins, each of the Ogdoadic monsters are represented artistically as some combination of a human and a snake or frog, and are grouped in pairs of a male and female that represent some inherent property of the primordial waters that they come from. Furthermore, it was stated that the Ogdoad, when they finally converged, would generate the first Ben-Ben, in which the sun would finally rise and give birth to all creation. And as a result of that, each of the Ogdoadic pairs are pairs of a light and dark monster, to represent the duality of the abyssal dark that they came from, and the light of creation that they birthed to give all life meaning. Playstyle wise, the Ogdoadic is an archetype that operates strictly from the graveyard. A majority of the Ogdoadic monsters possess either an effect to special summon themselves from the graveyard, or some effect to bring back a card from your graveyard to your hand or field. This, combined with some of the most powerful reptile and chaos support we have available at putting cards in the graveyard, allows this archetype to set up incredibly fast to summon out powerful Ogdoadic beaters to overwhelm your opponent in an instant. Something that I hope to showcase as I get through the deck profile. Anyway, I've droned on enough. Without a further ado, let's get into the deck profile. Starting off our deck profile with a pair of monsters that represent the stagnant waters of the primordial abyss, we have 3 Nunu and 3 Noya, the Ogdoadic remnant. Each of these monsters possess an effect to send themselves from the hand to the graveyard to send 1 reptile monster from the deck to the graveyard of the opposite attribute, with Nunu allowing you to send a dark reptile and Noya allowing you to send a light reptile from your deck to the graveyard. Furthermore, each of these Ogdoadic remnants also have an additional effect, with Nunu being able to special summon itself from the graveyard if you control no monsters or an Ogdoadic monster, and Noya being able to search for an Ogdoadic spell or trap card upon being normal or special summoned. Having already established the Ogdoadic playstyle, it's pretty easy to see why Nunu and Noya are essential cards for the Ogdoadic deck. Possessing in-hand effects that act as foolish burials for all your Ogdoadic monsters, Nunu and Noya provide immense graveyard setup for your Ogdoadic deck, sending crucial Ogdoadic monsters from your deck to the graveyard to be brought back by their own effects to continue your plays. Furthermore, both of these in-hand effects then proceed to benefit the secondary effects of the Ogdoadic remnants, with Nunu putting itself in the graveyard to be brought back by its own effect to then be used for tribute or link plays, and Noya with its effect that triggers on special summon on top of normal summon, setting itself up in the graveyard to be brought back by other cards to then search you your Ogdoadic spell and trap support. These things, combined with how the other Ogdoadic monsters interact with monsters being summoned back from the graveyard, makes these cards crucial for a majority of your plays and essential starters in building any of your boards. Moving on to our second Ogdoadic pair, with the pair that represent the primordial darkness of the waters that they come from, we have the 2 Curse, the Ogdoadic Light, and 1 Alarit, the Ogdoadic Dark. Both of these monsters are level 8 reptile monsters with an in-graveyard effect that allows them to tribute 1 monster you control to special summon themselves from the graveyard and then apply some benefit to your opponent, with Curse allowing your opponent to special summon 1 level 4 lower monster from their graveyard with its effects negated, and Alarit allowing your opponent to add 1 monster from their graveyard to your hand. Furthermore, upon being special summoned, they each have an on-summon effect, with Curse allowing you to target 1 level 4 or lower Ogdoadic monster in your graveyard and special summon it onto your field, but it gets banished when it leaves the field, and Alarit allowing you to target 2 of your banished reptile monsters and put them back in your graveyard. Now, if the last Ogdoadic pair was meant to be the starters for all your combos, these Ogdoadic pair was meant to be your extenders. Dumpable off of your Ogdoadic remnants, each of these Ogdoadic monsters make active use of the remnant that send it, with Alarit here being able to tribute the Nunu that special summoned itself to put the banished Nunu back in the graveyard to be special summoned later, and the Curse being able to special summon out the Noya that sends it to get its search effect off. As level 8 monsters, they make fantastic rank 8 options, and the fact that they don't banish themselves when they leave the field makes them fantastic link options as well. This, combined with the fact that you can utilize this effect on every turn, makes some fantastic cards to generate field advantage to set up your Ogdoadic boss monsters, of which you'll utilize to fight your opponent with. However, it's important to note that these cards aren't without flaws. The fact that both these monsters can only be special summoned from the graveyard and not from the hand makes these cards horrific bricks if you were to ever draw into them. Furthermore, the benefits that they provide your opponent upon special summoning themselves from the graveyard onto the field allows your opponent some level of recovery that they might use to win on the following turn, and it's these flaws that determine the ratios for these cards. We're playing a limited number of copies of both these cards because we don't want to draw into them, but enough copies that they can be sent off of our remnant when we need them. Furthermore, we're playing 2 Curse and 1 Alert because the benefit that Curse provides is less impactful compared to Curses. You may think Curse's effect to special summon one of your opponent's monsters onto their field might benefit your opponent more, but the fact remains that monster comes onto the field with its effects negated, limiting its usage. While Alert allowing your opponent to add back any monster from their graveyard not only allows them to add back monsters that they can actively use on the following turn to come back with, but also add back hand traps they can actively use on this turn to stop your plays with, providing a much bigger impact to a lot of your combos. Thus, there are reasoning for playing 2 Curse and 1 Alert. Continuing on to our next pair of Ogdoadic monsters, we have the Ogdoadic pair of boss monsters that represent the unknown nature of the primordial waters that they come from, and our 1 Aaron, the Ogdoadic King, and the 1 Amnesia, the Ogdoadic Queen. Both these monsters can be special summoned from the graveyard by attributing 2 monsters you control, and they both possess a disruption effect on top of a recovery effect. Starting with Aaron here, Aaron, should your opponent add a card to their hand, you can send 1 random card from their hand to the graveyard. Furthermore, while on the field, should your opponent send a monster from the field to the graveyard, you can add 1 light or dark reptile monster from your deck or graveyard to your hand. Moving on to Amnesia, should a monster be special summoned from your opponent's graveyard onto the field, you can send 1 card they control to the graveyard. Furthermore, should a card be sent from your opponent's hand or deck to the graveyard, you could then proceed to special summon 1 light or dark reptile monster from your graveyard onto the field. As the proverbial king and queen of the Ogdoadic archetype, it's very clear that these monsters were meant to work in tandem with each other, with one monster's disruption effect triggering the other's recovery effect. By sending a card off your opponent's hand to the graveyard with Aaron's effect, you actively trigger Amnesia's effect to bring back 1 Ogdoadic monster from your graveyard onto the field. Likewise, by sending 1 monster from your opponent's side of the field using Amnesia's effect, you actively trigger Aaron's effect to add 1 Ogdoadic monster from your deck or graveyard to your hand. And while getting 4 monsters on the field might seem hard, it's very clear that this deck specializes in summoning out monsters using alternative means, meaning that it's very possible to summon out both Aaron and Amnesia in 1 turn on your first turn to start disrupting your opponent with. Furthermore, it's important to note that these effects don't necessarily have to be triggered off your opponent doing things, you can actively trigger them yourself as well. By using cards like Alarith's effect to have your opponent add a card from your graveyard to their hand, you actively trigger Aaron's effect to start destroying their hand. Likewise, by using cards like Ice Dragon Prison to summon monsters directly out of your opponent's graveyard onto your side of the field, you can actively trigger Amnesia's effect to send cards from your opponent's side of the field to the graveyard as well, actively aggressively using both effects to clear your opponent's field and hand to then go for game. Moving on to our final Ogdoadic pair, we have the pair that represents the infinite vastness of the primordial waters of which they come from, of which we only play 1 monster in our 1 Zoha, the Ogdoadic Boundless. Zoha here, while on the field, should it be special summoned from the graveyard or sent to the graveyard from the field, allows you to add 1 Ogdoadic monster from your deck to the hand and then have your opponent draw a card. More importantly though, while in the graveyard, you can send 1 card from your hand to the graveyard to add Zoha back from your graveyard to your hand. Now, Zoha for the Ogdoadic deck serves a few purposes. While the on-field effect can be rather useful in allowing you to add Ogdoadic monsters while also triggering effects such as Aaron to rip cards from your opponent's hand, the main importance of Zoha is the graveyard effect. It's pretty well known at this point that you can brick with some of the larger Ogdoadic monsters like your Curse or your Aaron and Amnesia that require themselves to be in the graveyard. Zoha in turn provides you an easy way while in the graveyard to send those monsters from your hand to the graveyard, putting them into the graveyard, while adding Zoha to your hand to then be normal summon, which then provides you tribute fodder to summon them, providing you an easy graveyard setup while also providing you tribute fodder to then start your plays with. Finally, wrapping up the Ogdoadic monsters, we have the proverbial boss monster for the entire Ogdoadic archetype that represents the entirety of the Ogdoad in our 1 Ogdo Abyss, the Ogdoadic Overlord. Overlord here can be special summoned from the graveyard by attributing 3 monsters you control, and while face up on the field, once while it's face up on the field, you can send every monster on the field that's not special summoned from the graveyard to the graveyard. Due to the fact that Overlord's effect can only be used once while face up on the field, it doesn't quite have the same long-term advantage that Ogdoadic King or Ogdoadic Queen would provide. However, what it lacks in that long-term advantage, it makes up in pure raw power in a singular moment with its send effect. Being able to send all monsters on the field that weren't special summoned from the graveyard to the graveyard makes this card non-targeting, non-destruction removal that can be activated on either player's turn for either a disruption or a clean field nuke, which doesn't affect any of your monsters since they're special summoned from the graveyard. Furthermore, by turning itself off of that effect, this card makes itself an easy tribute fodder to summon out your Ogdoadic king or queen, which can then be utilized to start disrupting your opponent after you've emptied out their resources with this card's effect, making this card a great starter for a lot of your plays going second to then go into your Ogdoadic king or queen where it really matters to then break your opponent with. Moving on to our non-Ogdoadic monsters, we continue the Egyptian theme with 3 Hieratic Dragon of Iset alongside the 1 Hexar Dragon Core that it special summons. Now, something interesting to note is that all your Ogdoadic monsters tribute monsters in general to summon themselves from the graveyard, meaning that by tributing an Iset for something like your Curse or your Alarit, you can trigger Iset's effect to summon out a Dragon Hexar Core, which as a level 8 can be overlaid with your Curse or your Alarit to make a rank 8 play. Likewise, as a level 8 tuner, alongside the Curse or Alarit, you also have the option of making some very interesting synchro plays that can produce some very powerful boards, which we'll explore later. Finally, rounding off the monsters with the hand traps, we're playing the Gamma package consisting of 3 Psyframe Gamma as well as 1 Psyframe Driver. Now, in most of your plays, when you're sending things for things like your Remnant, or when you tribute monsters to summon out your Curse or your Alarit, in most cases you won't be controlling monsters, and as a result of that, it's very easy to have your Gamma live in those situations to protect your plays such that they can go off easier. Furthermore, it's important to note that upon special summoning a Gamma as well as the Driver, you provide 2 monsters onto the field that can be used as tribute fodder for all your other plays as well, making this card doubly synergistic with the majority of your Ogdoadic deck. Moving on into the spells, we start things off with our 3 Ogdoadic Water Lily. Water Lily is a normal spell card which, when activated, allows you to send 1 reptile monster from your deck to the graveyard, and then, should you have 5 or more reptiles in your graveyard with different names, you can then proceed to special summon 1 reptile monster from your graveyard onto the field. Like your Ogdoadic Remnants, Ogdoadic Water Lily acts as another Foolish Burial for the deck, sending crucial Ogdoadic monsters from the deck to the graveyard. But unlike the Remnants, Ogdoadic Water Lily also comes with the added benefit of being able to revive any of your Ogdoadic monsters should you already have prior graveyard setup, making this card great recovery as well. What's nice about the Ogdoadic monster is that none of them have summoning conditions, meaning that it's very possible for you to dump one of your Ogdoadic boss monsters with Lily's effect and then immediately revive it, circumventing their costly summoning conditions to immediately put them onto the field to pressure their opponent with their on-field effects. Following up from there, we have our next spell card in our 3 Snake Rain. Originally released in the GX Booster Tactical Evolution, Snake Rain is one of those cards that were clearly ahead of its time. By discarding 1 card from your hand, Snake Rain allows you to send 4 reptiles from your deck to the graveyard. Now, if you thought being able to send 1 reptile from the deck to the graveyard with things like your Ogdoadic Remnants or your Lily was powerful, Snake Rain is essentially that, but on crack. Looking back on our monsters, we often have an average of 4 monsters we assuredly want to get into the graveyard to build our board with. That being our Curse, our Alarit, our Nunu, and one of our Ogdoadic boss monsters. Snake Rain conveniently allows you to send all 4 of those monsters to the graveyard in one fell swoop, providing you maximum graveyard setup in 1 card. The card is not once per turn, and on top of that, the discard itself also provides you an opportunity to pitch some of your bricked Ogdoadic monsters from your hand to the graveyard as well, essentially making this card the ultimate setup starter for any kind of Ogdoadic play you might want to do, and definitely a card that you want to actively find a way into your opening hand. Moving on from there, we continue with our spells with some consistency spells. We're playing the 3 Hieratic Seal of Convocation to search into our E-set, as well as our 3 Pot of Prosperity. Now, Pot of Prosperity has made several appearances in a number of my profiles already as the universal consistency booster for most decks, but it's important to note that for Ogdoadic, it's the only pot card that works for the deck. Realistically, you don't want to be playing draw spells like Allure or Extravagance since you don't want to draw into your larger Ogdoadic monsters, and you can't play cards like Desires or Duality whose drawbacks actively hinder your deck's ability to function. As such, Prosperity is the only card that allows you to dig into your deck for the right starters that you need without causing bricks or limiting your plays, making it the best and only pot for the deck. Wrapping up the spells, we finish things off with the staples in our 3 Forbidden Droplets for effect negation, 1 actual Foolish Barrel for further graveyard setup, and 1 Monster Reborn as another easy way to bring back our Ogdoadic monsters. Going into the traps, we start things off with our 1 Ogdoadic Hollow, a continuous trap that during the main phase allows you to tribute 1 reptile effect monster to target 1 monster in your opponent's graveyard and special summon it to your side of the field, but it returns to the graveyard at the end of the turn. This card not only serves as an alternative target for your Noya should you have already opened the prime target in your Ogdoadic Water Lily, but it also provides your deck some form of graveyard disruption while also giving your Amnesia an outlet to trigger its own disruption effect. Speaking of our Amnesia, the other and last trap we're playing also has the potential to trigger her effect as well in our 3 Ice Dragon Prison. Like Hollow, ITP also specials a monster from your opponent's graveyard, but unlike Hollow, ITP does so with the benefit of also removing a monster from your opponent's side of the field as well. Thus, in combination with Amnesia, actively allows you to remove 2 cards from your opponent's field for a pretty devastating combo that can often end turns. Transitioning into the X deck, we start things off with the single Reptilliane Echidna. Echidna is a Link 2 monster that requires 2 monsters, of which one of them must be a reptile. While on the field during your main phase, you can target one monster your opponent controls and reduce its attack to 0. Furthermore, during your main phase, you can also add unique reptiles from the deck to the hand equal to the number of monsters your opponent controls with 0 attack. Echidna, as a standalone card, provides your deck a useful means of not only weakening an opponent's monster, but also a way to add Ogdoadics from your deck to the hand relative to those weakened monsters. However, its usage spans well beyond that. Since Echidna adds as many monsters as the number of monsters your opponent controls with 0 attack, this card can search you more as your opponent commits more small monsters, like tokens, to the field, with the potential of even adding 5 monsters should your opponent control 5 0 attack tokens. Something that your opponent may not necessarily do, but something that we will definitely be actively attempting to execute in one of our combos. Our next Link monster that we play is our 1 Alien Shock Trooper M-Frame. M-Frame is a Link 2 monster that requires 2 reptile monsters to make and has a quick effect that by discarding a reptile from your hand to the graveyard, you can distribute 8 counters onto monsters onto the field equal to the level of the discarded monster. Furthermore, should M-Frame be destroyed, you can special summon non-link reptiles from your graveyard equal to the number of monsters your opponent controls with 8 counters. So if Echidna was the means to gather reptiles from your deck to the hand, Alien Shock Trooper M-Frame is your means of spamming them onto the field. By discarding any high-level Ogdoadic monster, you can flood your opponent's entire field with 8 counters. Then, when your M-Frame would be destroyed, you could then utilize that field to then flood your field with all your Ogdoadics, providing you potentially the means to swarm your entire field with all your Ogdoadic boss monsters in one instance. And I want to point out that M-Frame's floating effect triggers whenever it's destroyed in general, not just by your opponent, meaning that if you want to be proactive, there are means to blow up your own M-Frame on your turn to trigger its effect early to flood your field on your terms. Wrapping up the links, we're playing the 1 Reptilliane as a means to turn our monsters into reptiles for other link plays, the 1 Nightmare Unicorn for removal, the 1 BLS since we are playing high level monsters, and the 1 Unchained Abomination, of which you can use to destroy our opponent's monsters, but also our own Alien Shock Trooper M-Frame. Moving on into some of the exceeds, we have the 2 King of the Feral Imps to search into our reptile monsters, including both of our Ogdoadic remnants. We have the 1 Dingirsu for removal as well as protection. We have a number 38 as well as a number 90 for spell and monster effect negation. We have a Galaxy Eye Cypher Dragon as well as a Galaxy Eye Cypher X Dragon for light targeting protection, as well as the 1 Sky Thunder Zeus for should any of our Xyz monsters battle. Wrapping up the X deck, we have the 1 Lone Synchro in our 1 Phantasmal Lord Ultimil Bishbalkan, a level 12 synchro that can only be made by sending a tuner and a non-tuner to the graveyard with the same level, whose levels are both greater than 8. Once per turn, Bishbalkan allows you to special summon as many tokens onto both sides of the field so long as the number special summoned is equal to both sides. Now obviously we can use the tokens that we summon onto our side of the field for link plays or to tribute to summon out our Ogdoadics, but it's also important to note that the tokens that we summon onto our opponent's side of the field have 0 attack, meaning that alongside a Reptilliane Echidna, we also have the means of searching 5 monsters from the deck through that play, allowing us access to some pretty awesome combos that we will be exploring shortly. So it's at this point that we reach the combo component of the deck profile, and fortunately, unlike a deck like Dragundi with its variable combos, Ogdoadic actually have a few set combos which I'd like to showcase. 2 card combos in fact. The first 2 card combo requires that we open any Ogdoadic monster alongside a Snake Rain, and ends up with 2 Ogdoadic boss monsters of our choice, while the second combo requires that we open any way to get an Ogdoadic tribute monster into the graveyard alongside a Hieratic Dragon of Iset, which ends up on 5 Ogdoadic monsters of your choice onto the field. Anyway, the cards are ready, the deck is shuffled, let us begin. Starting off our combos with the most basic combo of opening 1 Snake Rain alongside any Ogdoadic monster, this board ends up with 2 Ogdoadic boss monsters of our choice. The way this is going to work is that depending on what Ogdoadic monster we open, we're going to send the other required ones to the graveyard with our Snake Rain. We're going to activate the Snake Rain and send the one Ogdoadic monster that we open from our hand to the graveyard to send the remaining ones in one Ogdoadic boss monster, one of the remaining remnants, one of the curse, and one of the Alarit to the graveyard, for our 5. From there, since we control no monsters, we can activate the effect of Nunu in our graveyard to special summon itself back from the graveyard onto the field, of which will then tribute, which has banished itself, to summon out our curse onto the field. Since Curse was special summoned, Curse will then proceed to special summon out the Noya in our graveyard, which Noya, upon being special summoned, will allow us to add our Ogdoadic Water Lily. From there, we're then going to tribute the Noya, which will get banished thanks to the Curse's effect to summon out our Alarit, with Alarit's effect upon being special summoned, putting back both the Nunu and the Noya back into the graveyard. From there, we're then going to tribute both of these monsters to summon out one of the Ogdoadic boss monsters lying in our graveyard, let's say in this case the Aaron, before then activating the Water Lily's effect to send one Ogdoadic monster from our deck to the graveyard, in this case let's say an Ammonesia. And since we do now control 5 reptile monsters in the graveyard with different names, we can then proceed to special summon out the Ammonesia onto the field, of which we can then pass our turn to our opponent with 2 Ogdoadic boss monsters on the field. Now this board at a glance may not seem that threatening, but in reality this board has a lot of long-term advantage. Both Aaron and Ammonesia are monsters that counter some of the most common actions in revival and searching in the game, and actively allow you to generate advantage when your opponent attempts to do so. Furthermore, it's important to note that you set up your graveyard to repeat the board over and over again on your following turn. Should your opponent clear this board, you can immediately activate Nunu's effect to special summon itself back onto the field, to tribute for the Curse, to bring back the Noya, to then tribute the Noya for the Alarit, to then repeat this process and make this board every turn. And this is only made using 2 cards, meaning that with the remaining 3 to 6 cards that you may have in your hand, you can do a lot more other plays as well to make this board a lot more terrifying. Moving on to our second but more interesting combo, this combo requires that we open one Hieratic Dragon of Iset, as well as any way to get a Curse or Alarit into the graveyard to tribute our Iset. In this case, let's say we open a Nunu. So the way that this combo is going to work is I'm going to start by activating the effect of my Nunu to send one Alarit from my deck to the graveyard. From there, I'm then going to normal summon the Iset, then activate Alarit's graveyard effect to tribute the Iset to special summon itself to the field, of which I'll then activate the effect of my Iset to special summon out a Dragon Hexacore. Now surprise surprise, we have a level 8 tuner as well as a level 8 non-tuner, and we can use these monsters in turn to make our ultimate Bish Balkan into the extra monster zone. From there, we'll activate Bish Balkan's effect, and that allows us to summon 5 tokens onto both sides of the field, all in defense position and all with 0 attack. From there, we're then going to utilize the token as well as the ultimate Bish Balkan to make our first link monster in our Reptiliane. We're going to use Reptiliane's effect to turn one of the tokens underneath it into a reptile, of which will then link away another token alongside the now reptile token to summon out our Reptilliane Echidna. Now, Echidna's effect can at this point search for us for a few reptiles, but if we do so, we're locked into reptile monsters from the X deck for the rest of the turn. So before we do that, we're going to link away the remaining tokens alongside the Reptiliane as a link monster to summon out our Unchained Abomination. From there, we're then going to activate Echidna's effect, and we're going to add upwards of 5 reptiles, of which we'll only need 4. That being both of the Ogdoadic remnants for later, one Ogdoadic boss monster, as well as a Zoha. Now realistically, you don't have to add some of these monsters, but the 2 main ones that you want right now is the one remaining Ogdoadic remnant that you haven't used and the Ogdoadic boss monster. From there, we're going to activate Noya's effect, sending it from my hand to the graveyard to send a Curse from the deck to the graveyard, of which will then use Curse's effect to tribute the Echidna to special summon itself onto the field. Curse upon special summon will then summon out the Noya, and Noya's effect will then activate, allowing me to add a Water Lily from my deck to the hand. From there, since I control an Ogdoadic monster, I can then special summon out the Nunu from my graveyard and then overlay it alongside the Noya as level 4s to summon out our King of Feral Imps, of which will detach a material from it to search for another reptile monster, in this case let's say another Noya. Then we're going to link away both the King of Feral Imps alongside the Curse to summon out our Alien Shock Trooper, and then use Alien Shock Trooper's effect, sending the Ogdoadic boss monster in our hands to the graveyard to put an 8 counter on all our opponent's monsters. From there, we're then going to activate the Lily to send another Ogdoadic boss monster, in this case let's say an Ammonesia, into the graveyard, and since we once again control 5 reptiles or more in the graveyard of different names, we can then special summon out one of those boss monsters. Finally, as we end our turn, we're going to activate the effect of the Unchained Abomination, but we're going to use it to pop our own M-Frame. And since M-Frame was now destroyed, it allows me to special summon reptiles from my graveyard equal to the number of monsters my opponent has with 8 counters, of which there are now 5. So we can now summon out 4 monsters from our graveyard. We're going to summon out the one Ogdoadic Overlord, we're going to summon out both of the level 8s since we can, and then we're going to summon out another level 1 or level remnant in our Nunu. of which we will then pass our turn to our opponent. So let's do a head count of what we ended up with. Going from the 2 cards that we opened with, we ended up on 2 Ogdoadic boss monsters, in this case an Ogdoadic Queen as well as an Ogdoadic Overlord, on top of 3 additional Ogdoadic monsters, 2 of which are level 8, as well as 1 Unchained Abomination. Furthermore, in our hand, we ended up with 3 additional Ogdoadic monsters on top of the 3 cards that we would have opened in a starting hand for a powerful +5. And that is itself the true power of the Ogdoadic deck. Not necessarily in this available board, because let's face it, this board probably isn't as threatening as you'd want it to be, but in the longevity that this board provides in future turns. Should your opponent clear this field, all the Ogdoadic monsters would go to the graveyard, and they can actively utilize their effects to summon themselves back onto the field to rebuild this board again, and in doing so slowly grind out your opponent out of their resources, clearing your opponent's field with effects like your Overlord here to slowly beat them out and grind them for game. Speaking of Overlord specifically though, Overlord's effect will clear every monster on the field except your own Ogdoadic monsters, since they're all summoned from the graveyard, and as a result of that, you can actively clear your opponent's field on your opponent's turn that could potentially end their turn, and if your opponent can't answer this available field, you can actively convert all these level 8s into rank 8s or rank 4s with whatever remaining Ogdoadic remnants you have, to then OTK on the following turn for that clean game. And that's going to do it for our Ogdoadic deck profile. Honestly, I think this deck has a lot of potential for the current metagame. With so many Foolish Burial effects in this deck in our Ogdoadic Remnants, Lily, Snake Rain, as well as an actual Foolish Burial, this deck excels at setting its graveyard up really fast to summon out its boss monsters at any stage of the game. And with boss monsters that recur every turn and no real limitation on what they can summon, a lot of times this deck can easily overwhelm its opponent in the early game to really beat them out in the late game. And as a result of that, I think with a few more support cards, this deck can definitely be very competitive. Unfortunately, this deck still has a few problems. While the boss monsters are rather cool, they're not exactly impactful compared to some of the more modern negations that we have in other decks, and as a result of that, some of the boss monsters may come off as a little lackluster compared to some of the other meta decks, and that's something that needs to be improved in future support if we get any. Regardless though, my name is Tony Yang, this has been an Ogdoadic deck profile. I hope you enjoyed it, and I will see you guys next time.